can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I feel like $100,000.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Wise.
Dr. Jeremy Wise here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders like the founders of RX Bars, which I had no idea at the time how big they were until I got a text that said they sold to Kellogg for $600 million. Check out that interview with Peter. P90X founder Tony Horton talks about it. You know, you hear, Sean, about people making hundreds of millions of dollars, but he started off as a street mime. So he would make his food and rent money putting a hat on the street to make the money for the food in an apartment. I love hearing those stories. The founder of Atari, Nolan Bushnell, talks about, he was Steve Jobs' mentor, and he talked about how Steve offered him 33% of Apple for $50,000 and why he said no. Imagine that. This episode is brought to you by Rise 25, which I co-founded with my business partner, John Corcoran. And our mission is to connect you with your best referral partners and customers. And we do that for people for what's been the best thing for my business and my life, which is a podcast. I believe it's been the best thing to help me connect and give to the people in my network and profile them. And we help the company completely run and launch your podcast. We distribute it across all the channels, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify. And so you can show up and talk, spread your thought leadership, have your guests on, and we do everything else. I credit it to be the single best thing I've done. It's not just a business. It's about leaving a legacy. This is how John, we're going to talk actually about how Sean, some of these groups have impacted his personal life, but I met my business partners through podcasting, best friends. We go on vacations together, and it also helps you leave a legacy for you and your guest. And so if you have, I don't talk about much about this, Sean, and John told me to talk more about it, but the inspiration behind it is really my grandfather, who was a Holocaust survivor who escaped Nazi Germany. And the Holocaust Foundation interviewed my grandfather about his story, just atrocities that he had to endure. And that his legacy lives on because of that interview. And it's on my about page on InspiredInsider.com. So if you want to check it out. But if you have a question about starting a podcast in general, I think if you're a business, you should do it 100%. It doesn't mean we have to run it for you. But if you have questions, email support@rise25.com, and we're happy to answer them so you and your guests can leave a legacy. I'm excited. Today we have Sean Magennis, President and COO of YPO. Talk about making an impact, because YPO, if you haven't heard of it, it's a global community of chief executives dedicated to becoming better leaders. And it's a platform that has more than 27,000 members in more than 138 countries. In my opinion and other people's opinions, YPO is arguably one of the most powerful groups in the world. To qualify, a member has to have at least $10 million in annual sales. I was listening to you and Cameron Harold talk. People, shout out to Cameron Harold and his podcast, but he was talking about how, I guess, the members of YPO in Thailand make up like a 30% of the GDP or something, who are involved in YPO because of the global impact and the national impact you guys and your members have. Sean began his career in South Africa, one of the country's largest producer of agricultural chemicals, and he founded an organizational development consulting business and an executive search business. And currently is an advisor of two companies. Shout out to Nuooly. It's Nuooly, which is a gig economy business for independent attorneys, and REM Brothers, REM Brothers, which is a hospitality and food service business. So if you're near Purdue University, near Lafayette or Dallas, check that out. Sean, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Jeremy. What a pleasure being with you. And just teeing off of your comment about your grandparents in the Holocaust, I've had the privilege of visiting Yad Vashem in Jerusalem several times over in 20-year gaps in between, and I can't tell you such a moving and emotional experience, and what anchors it for me, and it's what you and John are doing, is you're connecting people with authentic stories, and you're paying it forward by leveraging the lessons learned. And I was just there in May again, and watched was at Yad Vashem and listened and watched a testimony from a survivor that it was just so extraordinary. And her story was she was saved as a child and looked after by a French family, and she literally still goes back every year to this farmhouse. Remarkable story. Anyway, I didn't mean to digress, but
this is what it's about. There's no digression. It's wherever they, like I said. What made you go to Israel?
Well, my YPO chapter was doing its chapter retreat, and my wife and I hosted 20 couples at one of our signature events called Touch Israel, run by members from our Israeli chapters. It's just extraordinary what this group of members is able to do in 4 days. It's really a deep dive, immersive deep dive into the culture, the Israeli culture, the Palestinian culture, all of the issues in that region.
Talk about complexity.
Oh my gosh, talk about complexity. And by the way, this incredible underlying willingness to work together for a cause which is greater than ourselves, which is literally, how do we make things better? How do we embrace diversity of opinion, and not get sucked into, hatred and, agendas, etc. I mean, that we could take a year and not get through that discussion.
Yeah. No, I love hearing your thoughts on that because, hearing someone like that, a survivor or whatever it is, it could be, a CEO or someone going through a crappy time. And oftentimes we only see the surface level stuff, like things are going perfectly. And I love hearing those stories, or I watched the interview he did and hearing those things because it's humbling and it puts perspective on things. And, John and I always talk about, let's say we're having a bad day or something's not going right. I'm like, well, at least I wasn't, my home wasn't burned out and I had to live in the woods for 3 weeks. Like I can go back to that and be like, okay, like really in the grand scheme of things, I'm okay,
Absolutely. And, we grow up in the United States and first world countries with this very naively privileged perspective, where, particularly those individuals who don't travel. And I always encourage, starting as young as you possibly can to travel affordably, but go and see the rest of the world. Go and see how incredibly fortunate we are, particularly in the United States. And by the way, the most giving culture in the world is the United States. We're so generous and we're so philanthropic. But we also get bent around the axle with things that are just not important to talk about when you see how suffering exists in other places in the world. Anyway, and I still think we're an incredible beacon of light to the rest of the world, and we should be. And that's something that, I personally am very, very, very keen to talk, and I talk to friends about it a lot, and, debate and civil discourse. If we can have a rational debate today, which is increasingly more difficult, it's how do we maintain those principles and that beacon of light, because that's what helps the world get better.
Yeah, I want to talk about growing up in South Africa and what that was like, but I want to start with, obviously you've had a lot of success in business, and helping run one of the most powerful organizations. What's been, when you think back, on the challenge thing and tough times thing, what's been a big challenge or tough period that you had to push through to get to where you are?
I think the first big one was really leaving South Africa. It's never easy to leave the country of origin, all your connections, your family. That was difficult.
How old were you?
I was 25. And, it was still in the midst of apartheid in South Africa. It was a very difficult time. I just finished, a stint in the infantry, in the military service, and then finished university, and I'd worked for a couple of years. And, at the time, if I had a crystal ball, my decision might have been different, but, I didn't see the kind of successful resolution that occurred in South Africa. It was a remarkable thing that people like Nelson Mandela and Bishop Tutu and Frederick W. de Klerk, the apartheid era president, who really galvanized with those two gentlemen and many, many others. Lots of YPOs, by the way, participated in helping that go through. But, it was that was probably the most difficult. And then going through a business failure. I had a very significant failure in 2008 with the, collapse of the financial markets. I was at the time involved in a real estate business building low-income housing. And my wife, who is a fellow EO member, we met through EO, parents of YPO, We were both in real estate, different ends of the market. And within a week, all of the capital dried up. And that's crazy. That was a significant setback because you're not prepared for it.
Real estate 2008, don't mix.
Don't mix.
Yeah, God. So what do you do at that time? Like things.
I think it's about resilience. I think it's about grit. It's about the people that you surround yourself with. It's the friends that you've made over the years and the contacts. And, it's being smart enough to have, some kind of safety blanket. So my wife and I are big savers, for example, and it's very important to have that rainy day money. Doesn't have to be a lot. And then also, we found living within our means, we were not stretched from a cost perspective, and that enabled us to tack left, pivot, both get involved in different things and literally pull ourselves up by the bootstraps, and we had each other. I think that's such an important
support system
of my success, my life experience has been having a phenomenal partner to go through these things with.
And a support system. At the time, were you in an organization?
I was, and YPO was incredible at that time, not just for me, but for many individuals whose businesses were significantly impacted around the world. I mean, you remember it. It was devastating for
terrible
some people. And in fact, I think that's where organizations like YPO are really the strongest, is at times
tough times
where we can help each other.
What do you do next? So at the time looking back, it probably, you end up on the better side of things, but at the time it's devastating. How do you pivot, and what do you do after that?
For me and for Maria, we both have an entrepreneurial spirit, and I immediately went out and started another business. I had two really good friends, Mark Kittle and Jack White, both in the electricity business. Both, by the way, had been left on the street when Enron collapsed.
Wow.
Both were builders of electricity power plants, and we put a little team together, raised some money. We had an idea to really be a bridge to renewables. So we started off with natural gas as a foundation. We did some consulting. And the last 4 years, I'm still actively involved on an advisory level with that business. We're about to build a really sizable, probably the cleanest natural gas power plant that'll be built at the time. That's going to go up hopefully over the next 2 years. But that's what you do. You dig down, you find a way to uncover an opportunity, and you get cracking. We didn't spend a week worrying about it, there was a little commiseration, I have to tell you. There was probably some Johnny Walker Black, but it's amazing how people rally, and everybody. Listen, and we weren't alone. There's so many people that have been in that boat, whether it's at that period in time or other periods of time.
How did you get customers at the time? So you start this new venture, you raise capital, you get, it's a trying time for the whole nation. How did you get customers?
So it's relationships. We were fortunate, and the three of us had existing relationships with organizations that were looking to save money on their electricity spend. We did some wonderful consulting gigs with some major firms, major Fortune 500s. We were looking to help several of them get off the grid, and really, for a lot of manufacturers, whether it's chip manufacturers or whether you're in manufacturing where electricity is a large part of your spend, helping them, get a 20-25% drop on their spend every year was significant. So we had a willing audience, we had a great
value proposition,
value prop, and we had relationships. The other thing, with organizations such as ours, we have a Rolodex where we can pick up the phone and say, would you be interested in hearing about something based on relationships? We don't solicit, we don't sell to each other, but relationships are the lifeblood of anything, basically.
Now, were they relationships from people you knew from YPO or EO, or?
Relationships from previous businesses, and then obviously a combination of EO relationships and YPO relationships. The network effect of those two organizations is extraordinary. Yeah.
So the new tagline for YPO, even if the economy tanks, you should join YPO because
exactly. And And, we say, and it's true because we've done research on this, time is the single, most precious resource that, you have, I have, every business person that I know. So, if you're going to get involved in spending money and dedicating time to a network or to an opportunity, it's important that you get value, and it's important that you can plug in with people that, one, are authentic, that are trustworthy, and in our instance, that are truly peers, so that right from the get-go that these are individuals that have similar life experiences, maybe very diverse backgrounds, live in different parts of the world, different experiences, but the basic DNA enables you to connect quickly, and that creates that bond, or that, we call it a safe haven, but it enables you to really authentically ask or be vulnerable. Vulnerability is not a sin. It's not a failing.
Right.
All of us have vulnerabilities. We all have blind spots. But it's important to recognize that, one, we're not alone, and that there is a place where we can share either, a need, a particular issue, and get valuable, input, advice, and additional opportunity creation.
Sean, you have a unique perspective because you probably touch and are in contact with more YPO members and even groups than the normal person. I'm curious, looking over the past years, what are some of the big lessons you've learned from YPO members? And it may be from a success, or it may be from a big mistake. What are a few of those lessons that maybe stick with you?
I would say a big one for me, and it's something that I'm seeing more and more and more, is to really cut through anecdote and really focus to the extent you can on data, the utilization of facts and data in making decisions or having conversations, and not just data that you Google and get online. You do it, but get 3 or 4 different sources. Actually pay attention to the realities on the ground. And the best way to do that, by the way, is to ask people that are doing it, that are in it. If there's an issue like we had in El Paso recently, and the big border immigration issues that the United States have, instead of listening to the mainstream media, go and talk to people that are on the ground. Actually, if you truly are interested, go and see for yourself. And so that's a huge lesson. The most profound conversations I have with members or peers is really authentically listening and dealing with the facts that they have, and then also being open to different points of view and different sets of data, because data can be manipulated, etc. But factual, to be as factual as possible is critical. There's so many lessons that come from that. So that's one. That's a big aha for me.
For a quick question before you get to the next one, I know people make emotional decisions a lot of times, or come to emotional conclusions, and we often sometimes put the facts aside. What was a business example that you can remember where someone was kind of talking emotionally about something? When they get down to the facts, it got very clear, I guess, that maybe they were right or maybe they weren't right. Is there one that you could think of that comes to mind?
I'm sure there's a myriad. One doesn't come to mind immediately, but let me dwell on.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because there are so many. For example, in the crisis of 2008, who thought that Bear Stearns was going to go out of business? So in the week before Bear Stearns went under, there was a lot of emotion around, listening to what was happening. The government's going to come in and protect. Now, they did protect some and not others. That's for the conspiracy theorists among us as to why that happened. But, those types of emotions, you just didn't know. And so a lot of decisions were based on hearsay, the emotion at the time, the collapse of the market. We were very fortunate in that we had some very smart people that said, listen, we're just going to hunker down. We're going to work through this. And it did take 2 years to work through the particular situation, variety of different issues. But our primary lender was like, stay calm. This is not going to be
talking to the people on the ground.
Exactly. And so, it's very, very easy to get caught up and make an emotional decision.
Right.
it's very difficult to step back and breathe and sort of
Yeah.
apply the 24-hour rule, the sleep on it rule. It's tough when
Yeah.
everything is going to hell in a handbasket.
If you would have listened to everyone else, you'd be like, "Oh, everything's dried up. We're doomed." And talking to the actual people, the person was kind of, "Listen, we got this. Don't worry about it."
Right.
Yeah.
Sometimes that takes wisdom, experience, and I'd hate to say this, age, and the benefit of having been there, done that, and looking back. And so,
Right.
who do you tap that can give you that, not necessarily reassurance, because at those times, it's all bets are off, but somebody that can provide perspective, help you breathe, help you think through it in a careful, pragmatic way.
Mm-hmm. I interrupted you. Was there another lesson that you had from YPO, like from a success or mistake?
The second biggest lesson is around the whole area of trust. And, it's become very, very difficult, particularly in the political world today, in whichever country and environment you are, to trust. Because, the moment you put out, let's say you embark on a particular strategy, you share with somebody, and then you read about what you shared in a private conversation the very next day splashed across the airwaves. One of the big differentiators that I've learned is, the importance of trust in a relationship, a business relationship, in any relationship, but particularly in the context of our organization. We have a saying that says we scale trust better than anybody. And the reason we do that is when members join, we teach our members how to interact with each other on the trust basis. I described it, and Cameron spoke about it, and with John. That concept is so powerful, and we have a penalty if you break that trust. You won't be invited to participate in that group any longer. And so trust takes on a whole different dimension. It also gives you the ability, I spoke a little bit, I mentioned vulnerability. It enables you to be a little vulnerable and to say, hey, listen, I don't know it all. I know something, but I don't know it all. And I'm trusting you with that vulnerability. Through your experiences, can you help me with something? And that's extraordinary. So those two elements, I think, for me, stand out amongst a plethora. I mean, there have been so many values and lessons learned, Jeremy.
So how do you, obviously you bring together people who don't know each other, come in, they become vulnerable and trust. What are some of the ways that you teach people to, cultivate that trusting environment?
Great question. So the first thing is it's a process, and it is a little formulaic to begin with. So there are a set of norms that everybody agrees to, such like we are not going to disclose anything that we have discussed to anybody, not to my spouse, not to my attorney, not to my best friend. So norm one, you're going to show up and you're going to attend these, you're going to get together and you're going to attend these, as 100%. And, some of our forum groups, maybe you can miss one or two a year, but it's show up and be accountable for yourself. And then it's the utilization of a specific language protocol. So there's no judgment. There's no prescribing and giving advice. There is caution and care for language. We're not going to throw F-bombs around and be disrespectful and, make value judgments of any kind. So again, part of the norms. And then there's a process for giving feedback. There's a process of communication starters where you get, where you declutter, what's going on in your daily life, and you focus on being in the present, being authentically you, and being open to receive feedback and experience, and to giving and sharing experience. So that whole process is very defined. It's very well established. And then we train our members, and we train our member forum moderators to actually deliver on that promise. And then it's up to the group. Once the group coalesces, you can have a group of 10 strangers. They go through that training and that formation experience together. They develop their norms, and then you're away to the races. And then it's a matter of going deeper as those relationships evolve and develop. And extraordinary things happen. The depth, the caring, the learning is something remarkable.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. It's something that should be in any any business in general, having just a core set of values so things can be formulaic so that it's reproducible, each time.
Nothing wrong with that, right?
You said something before we hit record that struck me. You use the term, "This keeps me awake at night." And I love those things.
Yes.
I mean, not in a weird, sadistic way that keeps people awake at night, because it means it's that important. And you mentioned one of the things that keeps you awake at night is digital transformation. So I wanted you to talk a little bit about what you mean by that.
Sure. At a high level, everything we do is somehow now connected through digital and technology and the internet and WhatsApp and all of the things that in our daily lives we couldn't do without. Alexa waking me up in the morning and playing Elton John, or Eartha Kitt in my case, because I love Eartha Kitt. And your listeners will hopefully Google her now. And my favorite song is April in Portugal, Abril de Portugal. And I probably butchered the accent there too. But, digital is transformative. It's essential. It is part of absolutely everything we do today and will be even more so in the future. It is very, very difficult from a corporate standpoint to, one, for CEOs to understand all of the nuances, the development, the speed of transformation in the digital realm. And all of us have to. There's not an organization. Your organization's a perfect example, of a digital business with a very human and very real, personal underpinning. And so the trick is how do we do that in a way that's cost effective, in a way that doesn't disrupt, too much the current business profitability and efficiency. But it's a big spend for everybody, and it's also become ubiquitous in all parts of our life. So the challenges are, how does one stay relevant in that area? How does one prepare for it? How does one get ahead of it? It's probably the single biggest cost driver now for a lot of organizations. Highly skilled people, huge opportunities for learning and education. It impacts economies. It impacts the school system from K to 12. So it's a big one. And then there are obviously narrow areas within that. But that does keep me up at night because it's so important. And my personal journey in that regard is I've tried over the last couple of years to become as conversant, as knowledgeable as I can. And I try and do something on a learning basis, whether it's understanding, DevOps or, cloud development or, build versus buy strategies, or, how do you blend, the cost, do you do a combination of onshore, offshore? How do the various applications that exist out in the marketplace benefit your members, and how do we access that in a way that's both usable, simple, effective, easy? And there's nothing easy about digital at the moment.
What worries you most about that? Is it that it's possibly going to disrupt certain industries, or?
Not so much on the disrupt. I think the reality is we're disrupted now, whether we like it or not, and we're constantly going to be disrupted, and disruption is increasing. I think, you could read any, well-researched paper and that'll prove itself out. I think the more important thing is on two things really. The reality that we all have to spend and develop and understand and really embrace digital in all aspects. And the second is, how do we prepare ourselves as human beings to, if we acknowledge that we need to embrace it and we have to embrace it and we don't have a choice, then how do we remain relevant? How do we remain human? How do we not lose ourselves? Which I think is going to be the big question of the day at some point. We're already facing that, right? Smarter people, way smarter people than me, are looking at this and coming up with ideas, recommendations, strategies. It's a very exciting field, but it's a highly disruptive field.
Mm-hmm. Talk about Nuooly for a second, because this kind of bridges that, right? A gig economy business for independent lawyers.
Yes.
How did you hear about them? What is that? What do they do?
So a dear friend of mine, Michael Roybal, and I were neighbors. When we first moved to Dallas, we were both newlyweds. He's a very successful global trade attorney, and he'd left the big firms. He was being billed out at $750 an hour, probably only getting $100 of that in his pocket. And he decided to go out on his own and built a very successful practice over the last 20 years. And Michael and I were sitting down, and as we would, and over a glass of wine, and we were talking about the reality of the service and the gig industry and how, the big service firms all carry a massive amount of overhead. That overhead
Totally
gets passed on to the client. So we end up paying for it. And I shared with Michael, that we use independent attorneys for a lot of our work, who come from big firms, who still in some instances, have a liaison with that firm if you need the big firms for really important stuff. And there's a place for both. You need the big firms, not only for name and brand, but for, certain core expertise. But you need attorneys to do a bunch of different things. So Michael and his partner, Rosalie, said to me, why don't you join? This is an idea that we have a couple of years back. And we raised some seed money and we built a platform. And so the whole idea is create a community for independent attorneys. And they have to be vetted. They have to pass background checks. They have to be credible people with a track record, with verifiable, clients and ability. And we want to create a space for them to share customers together, go out and build new business, and really provide a home, because they don't have that connectivity and that glue and that camaraderie of working in an operation all day where they're with people, and leverage that. So it's very exciting, and I think it's got the makings of something extraordinary. If it works, we'll take it to independent accountants, and our niche is independent professionals. Start in the US and then we'll go broader field. But I love it, and it also gives me it's kind of a Saturday, Sunday, couple of hours on a weekend for me. Michael and I live close by to each other, and it's an opportunity to stimulate the entrepreneurial juices.
Yeah, I mean, anything that helps with inefficiencies or cuts off some of the fat is always very valuable. And there's a lot of that in that, if you're hiring an outside firm, they're billing a certain amount, the person's collecting, there's all these inefficiencies in that process, right?
Yeah.
And a two-sided marketplace is not easy. So just talk about for a second, who should use the platform, like from a consumer standpoint, and then who, maybe if there's attorneys listening, who should be on the platform itself?
Yeah. If you're an independent, a professional attorney with more than 7 years experience, and you're out there doing great work for customers, and you want to leverage, say you're a trade attorney and you need a personnel attorney or a real estate attorney, that's an opportunity for you to collaborate. And then any business that's looking to, hire a seasoned, capable attorney at a fraction of the cost of going to, some of the big overhead-laden firms, that's the place for you. And so it's accessible to everybody. A lot of attorneys have the existing client base, but they go project to project, assignment to assignment. They're not great at selling. They're not great at developing, necessarily a community of peers that they can leverage off of. So it'll help them in all those aspects. And then for people like myself that are looking for capable people, a particular project, or, and I have a budget and a limited spend, this is a great place to create and get additional value.
I'm always wondering, Sean, what people they have amazing relationships, really smart business mind. What takes up space in your brain? The other thing that takes up space in your brain is how do we bring grace and courtesy back into the workplace?
Yes. Oh, beautiful.
Why does that take up space in your brain, and what are your thoughts around that?
I'm so glad you mentioned that, Jeremy. I've observed in the world today, and I've been traveling globally for the last 25 years. I've been to so many different countries. And what I've started to see is an erosion of just the very simple foundational things. I like to call it sort of In fact, I'll be putting out a little 2-pager on LinkedIn in a little bit called Lessons I Learned from My Mom. And it's little things. It's the small kindnesses in communication. It's respect for others. It's engaging people where they are. It's sincerely, putting yourself in a position to listen to somebody else's opinion without having to agree with them. So it's the little things. It's doing what you say you're going to do. It's saying please and thank you. It's expressing gratitude, and not just for the sake of doing it. We've lost that. My mother called it manners. She said, manners maketh the man. It's an expression you've probably heard. It's an old expression. But, we've lost that. I think it's so important to have a conversation about bringing that back in. My 16-year-old daughter has been at a Montessori school since the age of 18 months. And they start teaching you grace and courtesy from the age of 18 months. They open the door. They help each other. She'll help, the smaller kids down the corridor, make sure that they're okay, make sure if they go to the restroom that everything's cool. We don't do that anymore because we've become so, I think, used to crassness and crudeness. And, again, I don't want to place my value critique on that, but I think there's something deeply fundamentally important about the little things. Doesn't mean that, you have to be a saint. I'm not a saint, and there's no such thing as perfection, and humanity is messy. But can't we just get back to, respect for each other?
Why do you think we've lost some of that?
I think I have some views on it. I think culturally, we've started to celebrate, behavior and principles and values that are entertainment oriented, and controversy sells, and all of that.
It's what gets eyeballs. It's more controversial. It's more kind of in your face.
If people can put that in the compartment of, this isn't reality. You don't go to a restaurant or buy, engage with somebody that's providing you a service and just, sprout off on them and disrespect them and, have an emotional breakdown in the middle of a restaurant because, your iced tea wasn't good enough. I mean, that's all popularized now. I'm using a very silly, simple example, but we popularized bad behavior in so many ways. And again, I'm not blaming digital and it does so many great things, but I just think as human beings, what I want personally, I just want to be treated with respect. I want to be thanked if, I do something, that's worthy of being thanked. And that's the little thing. So if I could plant a seed with your audience about, knowing what separates true good people and good leaders and authentic people from those that are bad actors, it goes down to those simple, fundamental truths. And I think we need to start having more conversations about that.
Yeah, I was thinking about this past week, and I want to know, how do you think we bring that back in the workplace? But I was thinking about this because, when you, as a business owner, you have people coming in and they treat you a certain way. Some people treat you well, some people not as well, but you like dealing with the people who treat you well. You give them better service, whether it's subconsciously or consciously, because you like them and you want to serve them. And I thought about that I should be treating the business I do business with like, they're my customer, because I want them to like me and want to serve me the best possible. And I don't know why I came to that realization that, I try and, like you said, no one's perfect, but I try and treat them, whoever I'm dealing with in business, and be courteous. Because it's very easy to, like, if someone doesn't, serve you in a certain way, to kind of like have that expectation, then snap back. But I realize, like, I just need to treat them as if they are a customer and I'm bringing them on as a customer of mine. So well, it's definitely top of mind.
I think it's important. And, when individuals come to work, I love your example of the workplace too. You come to work not just in the role with the title and the responsibility, you come as a human being. You come with all of the issues that are going on in your life. And let's acknowledge that life can be messy and difficult. for all of us. We all go through those waves. And so recognizing that people come with that, why don't we treat people more and treat each other more humanely? So I'm not saying it needs to be, apple pie and whipped cream, because there are facts and you need to make tough decisions, and sometimes you have to have difficult conversations, but recognizing the humanity that exists in all of us,
right,
and what we need in order to be motivated. It comes down to reputation too.
yeah.
Do you want to live your life with a reputation that's really spotty as a leader? Because then you're going to get what you create at the end of the day.
Yeah. I mean, someone told me this and it resonates with me and I do it, but I remember I was on hold maybe for like 30 minutes. I don't know, maybe it was an airline or something. And, obviously the reaction is to be pissed. And I think sympathizing with the person, because that person is just a person on the other end. It's not their fault, but just saying, calming myself down by saying, you must be super busy over there. And they immediately, treat them like a person, and they're like, they can vent a little bit, and they realize they then want to serve me a little bit better because I'm sympathizing with their situation, instead of me like, why the hell was I on hold for 30 minutes,
And listen, it is important not to be trapped in the drama triangle, and buy into, certain things. So there are things that I have learned about not being too attached to the story, but it's also being respectful that story has power and it has impact for the person sharing the story. Or, so there are those techniques and things that you learn, and it's perspective. And you and I both know we're going to deal with 25 different things today, and I don't know what I'm going to be dealing with in half an hour from now. It could be some distress, a medical emergency, something going wrong in a particular aspect of our business. We've got to be prepared for that. And as leaders, particularly, it's important to develop the skill set, the mindset, and to look daily. I'm a work in progress. There is no other way to describe myself. And so it's a daily chore. It's, how do I want to show up today? What is, who do I want to connect well with today? What did I learn from yesterday? Those are the types of things that help you progress, and I think help you retain that explorative aspect of your mind, which enables you to move forward, because otherwise you'll get stuck. It's been my experience.
Sean, you help oversee an organization of more than 27,000 members. What's the hardest part about your job?
Oh, boy. I think probably balancing interests, different interests, and making sure that
a lot of different interests.
Lot of different interests. Yeah. Making sure that those interests align, and making sure that that from a communication standpoint, individuals understand the big picture, the cause, and really focus on the value and outcome, as opposed to I've got a particular beef or particular I want to be I want my priority to be number one. Helping them understand that we're an ecosystem, we're a freighter, going down a particular path, and we've got commitments, we've got things on the go, and so it's balancing all of that. And then part of that is really keeping the eye on the prize, and the eye on the prize is really being a steward and providing a platform for extraordinary connections for extraordinary people. And if you keep your eye on the prize, that can solve a lot of the day-to-day realities of running any business, quite frankly.
Yeah. So the eye on the prize and the underlying, the value that you provide, so that you kind of use that as a North Star to make certain decisions.
What beautiful phrase, North Star. I mean, that's exactly what it's about.
You mentioned your mom obviously had a big impact on you. I wanted you to talk about growing up in South Africa. What was it like? How does that influence you?
It was almost an idyllic. Life is never idyllic, right? As I said, but both my parents were hardworking people, both entrepreneurs. My mother was one of 10 girls. My grandmother had 10 girls.
Wow, seriously.
32 first cousins. It's pretty amazing.
Wow.
all great people. I was very close to all my aunts. And, they grew up, they were Second World War era family. So they grew up, my grandmother had butcheries, and they had very little, but they managed to.
How do you even feed 10 kids? I mean,
that's a great
they go
question.
through like loaves of bread every day. I mean, that's insane.
And girls, how do you feed and clothe them? For a period of time,
no idea.
She was sent to a convent for a period of time because my grandmother was juggling. So she went off for a couple of years to the Newcastle Academy because she was juggling too many things. But you know what, people, this is where your question earlier about how do you get through tough times, when you've got love, when you've got a community, when you're built with grit and determination. And I think, the concept of the greatest generation, the greater the trial that one faces, if you've got the community and you've got that, I suppose, that
like support
framework
network
of love around you, you can get through a lot. So it was a fascinating time growing up. I was very blessed that my mother had very dear friends, a Mauritian South African family called the Ray family, who were I would say instrumental in my life in terms of providing, the kinds of familial relationships that I still respect and admire today. These extended relationships between families, are starting to dissipate somewhat. We would spend vacations at our friends' homes. We would do Christmases together, New Year's together, and so that growing up was amazing. I think another big part of growing up is my parents had a African gentleman by the name of Peter Ndlovu as their houseman, their house manager, who was with us for my whole formative time growing up. And there's a book in this, by the way, because it's a very emotional story, but he was not allowed to leave our house after 6 o'clock at night. He had to have a pass to work and live in our neighborhood. All these just bizarre, dehumanizing apartheid rules. But, the bond that I formed with him and he was like a third parent. And you speak to my sister, my brother, there was just this incredible recognition, one, that something was wrong, but oh my God, what an amazing man and what an amazing relationship. And then just the beauty of the country. It's an extraordinary people, extraordinary group of people, extraordinary place geographically, so much potential. So it was a privilege growing up, despite the very strange, bizarre circumstances, that people were living in.
Yeah, you mentioned the emotional part for him. What was his sentiments that he described to you about it?
One, he had to be very careful in public in the way that he treated us, touched us. He was a very physical guy. So, he would put us to bed every night. He would hug us. When we had fell out of a tree and, sliced a leg or something, he'd be the person to patch us up. And many years later, I retained my relationship with him until he died. But, my parents got divorced and he went to work for a really dear friend of my parents, and I'd go and see him every year. And in his room, there were pictures of, my sister, brother, myself, and he literally called us his babies.
Yeah.
So, the difficulty for him was his inability to express that very important part of his life. And excuse the emotion, but
yeah,
it was very tough for him. But he didn't dwell on it. He just retained this sort of unconditional care, deep affection for us, and we retained that same relationship, even though we'd moved 700 miles away. There was no daily connectivity. Certainly from the time we were teenagers. Then after I emigrated, I saw him less frequently. But the indelible lessons that, excuse me, that he left was people are people, and when you're loved and cared for, race disappears, color of skin disappears.
Right.
Profound lesson.
Yeah. To you, it's normal, because you live it, and to hug someone, it doesn't matter, like the color of their skin, their religion, but someone else who didn't experience that. I mean, it's hard for someone who didn't live that and experience it to probably even grasp what you're saying,
Mm. My brother Greg does a lot of great work. He's got a diversity business, and he goes and he teaches big companies, big Fortune 500 companies. And kind of as a white guy, having grown up in South Africa under apartheid, he's there up on in front of these groups, and he's leading sessions on the importance of authentically understanding how you can connect at a human level. And it's tough for people, if you've not experienced it. To your point, how do you delayer that? How do you take all of those life experiences where somebody has told you that person is bad because of that religious group is nasty because of that? How do you delayer that? So, and we all have it within us, by the way. I mean, I have seen miraculous things, particularly through YPO, where we don't advocate. We are not religious. We don't take a political advocacy position. And when you put people together who you wouldn't even think would have the ability to talk to each other in a trusted environment, it just miracles happen. And that's what gives me hope in the world, by the way, because I see it all the time. Yeah.
First of all, Sean, thank you for sharing that, and I appreciate it, and thank you for sharing your stories. And I just want to be the first one to thank you for taking your time and sharing your wisdom. And on my list, I haven't read it yet, but Born a Crime by Trevor Noah is on my list to read. I don't know if you've read it or heard of it, but it's kind of a crazy story, and that's definitely on my to-do list.
You've got to read it, and he's a great South African export. I just can't say enough about him. In fact, he came to speak in March this year. We had him as our closing keynote at a big event for over 3,000 members in Cape Town. And he got a 5-minute standing ovation.
Wow.
And he's the real deal. I grew up very privileged in South Africa. He didn't. And not that my life's any less important than his, but what an incredible, an amazing human being, a truly amazing guy.
Yeah. So thank you, Sean, for sharing your story. Where should we point people towards? I mean, obviously, we could send them to YPO.org.
YPO.org. We'd love to, if you're a CEO in any part of the world and you run a qualifying business and you'd like to both give back and learn and be part of a community where it's about, putting in as much as you put in, you'll get out. That's a promise and guarantee from me. We'd love to have you look at it. And
awesome.
Jeremy, just thank you. What an absolute pleasure, and thank you for all you're doing.
Thank you. Check out YPO.org. Thank you.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I feel like 100 grand.